Okay. I'd like to welcome our guest speaker today. Let me pin this view here. And Busshō, if you'd like to come up. Our guest speaker today is Busshō Lahn. He's a Zen student and teacher, and is officiate. What's associated with a couple of different Zen Flying Cloud and
I am, that's right. And Minnesota Zen Center in Minneapolis.
right.
Yeah,
And it sounds like a busy guy because he also manages this building, right?
I do.
So,
I'm back at work.
yeah, it's a busman's holiday.
Jeez Louise, yes, that's correct.
So welcome, and yeah, we're happy to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Sunday. What do we say in UU? Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday.
It's good to be alive. Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate your kind words. I'm aware that I'm held from the back here by all of our virtual friends. So it is wonderful to be here. I spent the day here yesterday, so I am back at work. But my name is Busshō Lahn. I'm a Zen teacher, Zen priest here in the Twin Cities. I've been connected to this organization, Aslan Institute, for, I don't know, in some way or another, for probably going on about 25 years or so. I have been affiliated with the Minnesota Zen Center in Minneapolis for probably 30-something, off and on, a little bit of a dance. I've been affiliated with my own center now for, I don't know, I'm going to say 10, but we didn't have a name. We didn't have a name until recently. We were just the Aslan Sitting Group, and the Aslan Retreat Group, and then the Aslan Zen Class Group, and afterward I was like, should we have a name? So we have a name. But yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. So basically I'm here today to tell you just a little bit about the tradition that I represent. So this is a little more probably informational than inspirational. But before I segue into that, I just want to say it's inspiring to be here. I'm wearing a different hat today, and so it's wonderful for me to be welcomed into your community. These are, as you gave words to, Chuck, these are difficult and challenging times, right? And so just to be aware, people still gather, don't they? You'll be reminded, people still gather. It's contagious, the spirit, whatever word we wrap around that. It still matters to me that people gather. And they gather to meditate, and they gather to sing, and they gather to pray, and they gather to hold each other up and share their joys and share their sorrows. And they do it at synagogues and mosques and temples like mine. They do it in buildings like this. And the groups are big and the groups are small, and sometimes very informal, sometimes very formal. But during times like this, I'm inspired by the fact that humans are still saying yes to the deepest parts of themselves and say there's something larger than just what I can see and hold, and I need to obey. I want to say yes, a deep surrender. So I recognize that's what's happening here today, and so thank you for letting me be part of this. So let's see here, I will shift gears. What am I here to talk about? Oh, Buddhism probably, right? Okay, so Buddhism. This is a UU organization, and in this country, this is anecdotal as far as I'm concerned, but my experience is that the Buddhist communities in this country, especially Zen Buddhist communities in this country, and Unitarian Universalists all over the country have had kind of a hand-in-glove, very friendly relationship for the past 50, 75-ish years, because there's really no Buddhist infrastructure in this country. There's becoming one now, but we're new. We're still the new kids in this country, and so we've been looking for places to meet. And so we meet in the basements of synagogues, and we meet with UU places, and we meet at yoga studios, and we meet in people's houses, and there's just a lot of familial kind of feeling. I'm speaking a little bit of my experience at Minnesota Zen Center in Minneapolis, because we've had a beautiful relationship with the UU church right down the street from us for years, and we're a house. So whenever we're going to have a big gathering of more than 40 people, we call and say, how would you like to lend us your, well, yes, we'd love to have you come. You're never a problem, you're always so quiet. Well, that's kind of our reputation on the street. They're not loud, that's true. I'm from the Twin Cities. I've lived here my whole life. I was raised Catholic. So ironically, or I guess there's a number of different ways of looking at this, but for today's purposes, I'll say ironically, I came to Zen Buddhism through the Catholic tradition. There was a professor at St. Ben's. Some of you know, if you're from Minnesota, you know St. Ben's and St. John's, north of here. That's where my sister went to school, and she took a class in Zen, given by one of the monks. And at the end of that experience of taking that class, she gave me the textbook and said, you gotta read this. You know. That was fascinating to me because it was given by a Catholic monk, and yet he was a Zen practitioner. So that was the expression. Some of you may be like, hold on a minute, that sounds like working two religions at once. I don't think you can do that. Well, you kind of can if it's Zen. You kind of can. So that was interesting, and it planted a seed of great curiosity in my heart, because he was a deeply devoted Zen practitioner, but he was a monk, Catholic monk. So I thought, wow, something's going on here. I read that book and was troubled in the most beautiful way by it, because it was unlike anything I had experienced before. I think it's fair to say that most of us are formed really profoundly by our first experience of faith, whatever that is, and we kind of tend to think that's how it is. This is what religion looks like. This is what a faith life looks like. And so to come into contact with a tradition that's really, really different from ours is broadening, I hope. It tends to elicit fear sometimes too, but it can also really be broadening. And that was very much my experience. Right? So I've been practicing on and off for a long, long time. I'm trying to kind of skip ahead here to my study, because the tradition of Buddhism has been around for a long, long, long time, 500 BC. We don't know the actual date. Some people claim they do, but I'm not a historian. But that's about the same time Taoism was putting down roots, Judaism in the Middle East. So it's one of the oldest faiths. Not quite as old as the Hindu tradition that would have been in northern India at that time. Buddhism is certainly its own individual entity, but it grew in a kind of Hindu or proto-Hindu culture. So it has a little bit of the we're a response to Hinduism feel to it. Does that make sense, the way I'm saying it? A little bit like, I don't want to force the comparison, but a little bit like how Christianity evolved in a Jewish culture and was kind of an extension, but kind of a response and kind of a relationship. Like, we're not you, but we're also, we're standing on some similar ground. Right. Very, very similar, right? So it comes to us as a very, very ancient thing. From the very beginning, it was designed to be not culture specific, not place specific. And that's unique, I've been told. I'm not a world religion scholar, but I said, no, right away from the very beginning, it was a world religion because it addresses the human condition. And it didn't have that sense of, because we are from here and we have a unique, direct relationship with something, that there's a kind of tribal kind of feel. No, quite the opposite. It was really, really intentional about that. So Buddhism has spread, of course, at this point all over the world. It's been in this country for quite a while, but when I said we're the new kids, what I'm referring to is people born and raised in this country going to it and really choosing it as their central practice. It's still pretty new, less than 100 years for sure. And in terms of world religions, 100 years is right like a blink. So we are really kind of still the new kids. Minnesota has become a Buddhist hotbed, and some of us know that, some of us are surprised to hear that. But the first big centers, especially in the Zen Buddhist tradition, were on the coasts, San Francisco and New York, and there was really nothing between San Francisco and New York for a long, long, long time, until a Japanese monk, Hadahiri Roshi, my teacher's teacher, the story goes, it's a good story, I don't know if it's true. Who cares? It's a good story. Right? I'm Irish. Don't let the truth get in the way. Yeah, right. It's a good story, right? flying from San Francisco, where they had the temple, to New York to lead a retreat, in the middle of the night, looking out the window and over the Midwest, going, that's where the real Americans are. We gotta bring Zen there. That's where the real Americans are. It's hilarious. We're no more real than anybody else, but I still think, oh, that's a cool story. So there was a group at the U of M that was studying Zen, and they raised enough funds to have him come here and lead retreats. There was a powerful response. These are grad students at the U of M back in the late 60s, early 70s. And they raised enough money to say, I think we can support you and your wife if you want to come here and start a center. And so he chose to do that. They did it on half of a duplex in Dinkytown neighborhood. The community grew big enough that they could buy a house, a really old, really big, in terrible shape house on the shores of what was Lake Calhoun, and is now Makaska. So that's been our home. We just, this is our 50th anniversary year. So good Minnesota Zen Center. That's interesting because it makes us one of the oldest temples in the country. 50 years. Wow. Isn't that crazier? I mean, I was raised Catholic, so I'm like, we have parking lots older than that. But in this country, that's like, wow, you guys are old. 50 years, can you imagine? I think, geez. But that shows you how new we are here. So what we're seeing right now, and then I'll shift gears. What we're seeing right now, I'm just aware of it because I think it's exciting. What we're seeing is the tradition that's traveled all over the world that we call Buddhism is really encountering in earnest this country and this cultural sensibility, which means the Zen sensibility is beginning to work its way in here and start to affect things subtly. And the American Western temperament is beginning to influence the tradition as well, which makes sense, right? Culture influences religion, and religion influences culture. So even during the course of my life, when I was a kid, I didn't know the word meditation. I wouldn't have heard that word probably. Maybe if I had known somebody who was into like, I don't know, like the Beatles or something, like, oh yeah, it's the thing that they do with the long hair and it's like a weird Hindu thing. And I don't mean, I had some really weird ideas what that was. Now, mainstream, who knew the word mindfulness?
Right.
Right, even 20 years ago, who knew the word mindfulness? That's a Buddhist term. It's one of the Eightfold Path, right there, number 7, mindfulness. No one would have known that outside of the Buddhist tradition. And now that's become mainstream. In fact, our country has even decided we know what the word Zen means. We don't. But Zen means chill. You got get your Zen on. I had my coffee, and my girl was there, and the sun was coming through the window. Oh man, I got my Zen on. That's not what that word means. No, it does. It does. We've decided it does. Okay. So now mindfulness is mainstream, and meditation is mainstream, and so this is really, really coming to the fore. So I'm excited because there isn't a Buddhist infrastructure in this country, which means we're kind of making it up as we go. We're really, really making it up as we go. And I know 500 years from now, there'll be an institutionalized, organized way of doing things, the way there was in my Catholic childhood. You know, if you show up for a mass, you know what you're signing up for. Right? You know what you're going to get. Whereas when you go to a Zen center, you're like, I don't know what I'm going to get. Are these guys going to be really, really formal? Super Japanese still? Are they still going to chant in Japanese? Or are they going to be groovy and sit in folding chairs? Chant in English? Are they going to make you take off your shoes? Or not? And we're still kind of figuring that out. What's it going to look like? We don't know. So I like it because I'm like, oh, it's like the Wild West. It's like the Zen Wild West, right? So it's me pretending still like I'm wearing a star on my thing, going, all right, I'm the sheriff of this one horse town. We're going to clean it up. Everybody's going to sit still for an hour. Wow, radical. So at the heart of this tradition, and what I'm much more interested in is hearing questions that you may have about things you've read, ideas you have, impressions you have about the tradition. That's more interesting to me than me just talking to you. And I also know we're on the clock. But what's important to know about Buddhism, and I think one of the reasons that it is being embraced here, is because at its core is a devotional relationship with human suffering. That's kind of the center of the entire tradition, is we're going to get really close to human suffering and figure out what it is. We want to figure out what it is. We want to figure out what causes it. We want to figure out what heals it. That's what we're interested in doing. That's a totally fair thing for me to say. On behalf of all Buddhists everywhere, for the past 2,500 years, everybody would agree at the heart of that whole thing is, wow, it hurts. It's a funny beginning for a religion, isn't it? But I've never once, in all the speaking I've done, over all the years I've done in churches and in schools and university, ever had anybody's hand go up and go, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? Because of course, everybody goes, yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's the first noble truth of Buddhism. That's where the whole thing starts, is this is hard. There's suffering here. And everybody goes, yep. So there's the mission. And everything is in service to that. Everything. So you can feel why some people would say, well, that means it's a world religion. Because you're not talking about men or women or old or young or dark skin or light skin or Hindus or Christians. You're talking about the fact it's hard. And everybody goes, yeah, it's hard. Wow. And you can also sort of see why in some ways it feels a little bit more like we're talking about medicine, almost, right, than religion. I guess it depends on how we define that, right? But the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, the heart of the entire tradition, is what we in the West would call the medical model of diagnosis, cause, prognosis, and cure. Diagnosis, suffering. We've all got it. That was an easy one. Cause. Talk a lot about what caused that actually, grasping and desire and wanting things to be different. And there's a selfishness in there. There's a whole bunch of different ways of talking about this. But realizing that it's caused internally, it's caused by our relationship with our experience. Huge thing. Wow, what causes this thing? And the prognosis, being infinitely optimistic in the Buddhist tradition. The prognosis is good. There is something you can do. There's a lot you can do, kiddo. Kiddo, that's my teacher's voice. Kiddo, doesn't matter how old you are. Kiddo, oh, it's okay, kiddo. You'll figure, yeah, it's okay. There's something you can do. There's something you can do. You're not stuck. Something you can do. And then finally, oh, there's a prescription. Well, we'll give you this prescription. Why don't we? We call it the Eightfold Path. Right? Living ethically, realizing we're interconnected, realizing everything is impermanent, realizing everything changes, practicing, looking at the mind, cultivating compassion. But you can kind of go, oh, I get it. Diagnosis, cause, prognosis, and cure is the same thing that happens when I go to the doctor. And she says, you've got that rash on your leg. We call that poison ivy. We know what causes that, where you're rolling around and, oh, yeah, I guess it was. Oh, yeah, okay, genius. Well, prognosis, sweetie, is good. You're going to live. You're not going to die. And here's some cream. I'll give that to you. Right? So what fascinates me about this is all of us do this instinctively when we encounter a problem, whether it's a flat tire or the fact we're fighting with our partner or the rash on our leg. We instinctively think in terms of what is it, what caused it, is there anything I can do, and if so, what is it? This is just like what comes up in the human heart. So to see, oh, at the core of this whole tradition is essentially a relationship with the thing that's hurting, and how do we relate to it? That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that's why it's had so much traction in this country, because what I'm describing to you is personal ownership. Like, I don't get to say it's you anymore. You're driving me crazy. I don't get to say that. Especially about her, I don't get to say that. You're driving me crazy, it's this traffic jam. I said, well, actually, no, traffic jams don't hurt. There's cars in a line, sweetie. Oh, yeah, no, that's coming from in me, isn't it? Yeah. Isn't that good news? That means you can relate to it in a different way. You can change something about that. You can lighten your heart. Wow, that's really important. So, because of the building we're in, Aslan Institute, this is for lack of a better term, mental health clinic. It's a mind, body, spirit model. So we have body workers here, we have spiritual directors here, we have therapists here, we have social workers here, and we've had massage and acupuncture and Reiki, and if it helps make people better, this is the building it happens in. Everything that I'm describing makes a lot of sense to the folks who are in this building, especially increasingly the psychologists. Because psychology in the West has really grabbed on to some of the central Buddhist ideas about what creates suffering. And we've made some really, really great, I think, marriages of the Western point of view about the shadow and the soul and stuff like that.
And trauma.
And trauma, for sure, for sure. And history, what causes that. With the Buddhist idea of patterning, how we think and how we perceive tends to create patterns. So in the West now we have things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which a lot of people have heard of. That's exactly Buddhism. They just changed the names. They pulled that right out and said, that works. Yes. Dialectical behavioral therapy, exactly Buddhism. Change the words, put it down here. Mindfulness, take away the weird Buddhist stuff, take away the head shaving and bibs. Boom, we can use that. That's really helpful for people. That's really healing for people. So can you kind of feel it's making inroads? In a secular sense, it's making inroads. But that's really encouraging to me, because all of it's medicine, from my point of view. So, there's a whole bunch more I could say. I could talk for 5 hours about this. It's what I do. But I'm aware I'm in a spiritual community, and I'm especially aware that I'm in a UU spiritual community. If I go talk at a Catholic church after Mass and say, wow, what have you guys read about Buddhism? Do you guys have questions or something? They're like, why do you think we've read about Buddhism? Oh, sweetie, no, we don't have the first clue, any more than I did as a 10-year-old about anything other than what I was raised in. But diversity and inclusion and pluralism is kind of your jam. Nobody does it better. So in your own personal experience, your spiritual path, your internal path, but also what you've read. Has there been stuff you've been exposed to, ideas about Buddhism or Zen that want to be asked? You've got somebody standing in front of you today who may be able to answer that question or at least confuse you further. I'm willing to do either. And if there isn't anything, there's more I can say, but I like I said, would rather hear your voice than my own. And if you could keep your eye on our friends behind me, because I can't. Is there anything you've read or studied or wondered about? Or I'm unoffendable. I'm not here to convert anybody to anything, so please.
I had read that Buddhism was not a religion.
Yeah.
And something that I was reading about Buddhism and trying to learn about it. And it got me wondering, well, what is? When does something become a religion, per se? And then when is it not? Not that I care about that so much, but it just makes me wonder a little bit about what the difference is. How is that structured differ from religions? Because religion, the idea of religion in my head gets us into a lot of trouble because it puts people in groups that say, I'm this, you're that. Oh, okay, well, we're not alike. So it becomes divisive that way. So now I have a reason not to like you or agree with you or let you in. And in that way, I feel like religion has done a lot of harm because people put people in boxes. And I know that we kind of want to swim with the same school, or we want to be like-minded, we feel safe that way, but yet there's a tipping point to that where then you exclude yourself from whatever else is going on around you, and you miss out because of that, and you live in fear because of that.
Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Did everybody hear that? Are you guys hearing that question okay? It's such a good one. I'm asked this a lot. I'm asked this question about, so is this thing a religion or no? That's fascinating to me. I don't think 50 years ago that would have been a question. It is now. So I'm going to play fast and loose. I don't know the answer. But anecdotally, meaning based just on my experience, the reason that's a question now and wasn't 50 years ago is because 50 years ago, Buddhism? What even is that? It's a chapter in your World Religions book. But you've never met one. Not if you're from Wisconsin or Minnesota. That's where my folks are from. So of course it's a religion. That's really weird. Right? Not like ours.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious because from the outside you're like, wow, this is all really weird. It's part of the deal. My guess though is, and I think there's a lot of truth to what I'm going to guess. I don't think there's an answer. That's what I get to say what I get to, is because at its core it is so fundamentally and structurally different than what those of us who are raised in a Judeo-Christian culture assume religion is. We have a pretty set idea of what it is. Religion's supposed to have a creation story. Oh, it's supposed to have a destruction story. There's supposed to be a supernatural, deified element to it. It's supposed to tell you what happens after you die. It's supposed to have a statement of belief. These are the things, that we believe. And Buddhism doesn't have any of those things. So they think, oh, that's not a religion. Oh, yes, it is. I mean, absolutely, it's religion. And when I go to the Zen Center and I'm in a room of a bunch of people who have shaven their heads and given up their names and changed their clothes and they're all wearing bibs and they're bowing their heads down to the floor and offering incense and chanting, I'm thinking, well, this isn't philosophy. Philosophers don't do this. This is more than just a way of life. These people have devoted themselves to something, and there's a name for that, religion. Religio, to bind back, to reconnect to the essence of something. So 100% it's a religion. And I also think, and again, this is the reason I told you that story at the beginning about how I came to this. I came to it from a Catholic. right? So what he saw in Zen was, I see an opportunity to work with my heart, and an opportunity to work with my mind, and an opportunity to expose myself to some profound spiritual insights that don't come from my own tradition. But nothing here on this side, I hesitate even to say side, but nothing over here is arguing with anything over here. Right? I think it is fair to say, I'm playing fast and loose, but I do think it is fair to say, especially Zen Buddhism, it's an orthopraxy, it's a practice-based tradition. It is not a belief. So when they say, oh, do you guys believe? I'm like, well, I mean, kinda, but our beliefs are stuff like everything changes. So I mean, I guess you can call it a belief, and that like I believe in gravity. You just don't have to if you don't want to. When you drop something, it's still gonna fall, right? It's from the very beginning. It isn't. We're going to create a story to explain. That's not the place. That's not where we go. Like speculation. No. And we don't have that agreed upon creation story, destruction story, what happens after you dies, or God or not God. Very purposefully. In the beginning, questions like that were politely either compartmentalized or sidestepped because of the divisive quality that you mentioned. Right? What I believe about my life can become a part of my identity, and now I'm going to protect it. Oh my God. Because it could be my specialness, or it could be the thing that you want to attack. Because you're 100% right. These things can show up as. So, in my eyes, of course, I mean, show me a world religions textbook that doesn't have a Buddhism chapter. It's a silly question. Of course it's a religion. But can it be practiced? Can it be related to in a way that doesn't have that I am bound kind of doctrinal feel that would help me feel separate from my Jewish neighbors or my Muslim neighbors or my Christian neighbors? Absolutely. I can't. I would actually argue at its heart, all faiths should take us to that place. The whole point is to reach out. Come on, man.
Right.
Come on. It's all right there. Love your neighbor. How much more clearly could I have said it? My God, they're going to kill me if I said, well, I'm going to die because here we go saying it. But I think it's the only, I think it's fair to say Buddhism is the only tradition that we're going to ask that of in this country at this time. Are you guys really religious? You're so different than what we're used to. Are you sure?
We get that question too.
Yeah, I bet you do.
A lot of parallels.
There we go. I'm like, of course I'm in a room with people who understand that. And the other thing I'm really aware of, and again, this is just anecdotally, but when I'm at the Zen Center, I'm aware there are a lot of people in that room who are angry, who have been hurt by what they were raised in.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to this building on this day specifically because they have an idea this ain't religion. And they're not going to make me, and they're not going to have commandments, and they're not going to do the finger thing, and I'm not going to get scolded, and I'm not going to have to say rosaries if I swear. And that's all that is true. Like, that is true. None of that will happen to you here, I promise. And if you want to come in here and be a Presbyterian and meditate with us, great. You want to be an angry atheist? Great. We got plenty of them. Do you want to be a devout Catholic? Great. Come on in. Knock yourself out. Silence holds everybody. But I'm really aware, again, because of this kind of Wild West thing happening, a lot of folks are flocking to the thing that feels so different than what they're raised with. This is the thing that I have issues with, and I call it religion. So I'm going over here. This for sure isn't that.
Hence another parallel.
Hence another parallel. No wonder we get along so well, you guys.
So,
Did you have something back there? Your hand went up at one point, and it took me a while to get back to you. Oh, I'm just imagining it.
I would like to hear more about the monk, the Catholic monk.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just he must have been able to hang on to his doctrinal kind of approach to Catholicism, but aided by the practice of the
Zen,
Zen. Is that, can you kind of break that down a little more, or?
Sure. I've got a soft spot for this gentleman. I invited him to my ordination.
Mm-hmm.
He was thrilled to be invited. He was a music professor.
That explains a lot.
Isn't that? I'm like this is the universal language. How dare you sing along with my Beatles? You're an American. I'm British. Do you feel it? It's like this sort of silliness of that. He was a music professor. Beethoven was his specialty, and he was a pianist. So he toured the world playing sonatas. He was extraordinary. I'm using the past tense. I think he's actually still with us, but I've fallen out of contact with him some years ago. Anyway, he was, I'll try to make this short, he was fascinated with time because he's a musician. And music has a relationship with time, right? I mean, there's a time signature, and there's a way of, music and time are really intimately related. And Zen, and Buddhism in particular, has a very interesting relationship with time. And so as a musician, he was fascinated by how Buddhists saw time. They kind of deconstruct it, and he was really fascinated by that. He discovered Zen, he began practicing Zen, and he ended up practicing both of those for the rest of his life. You are correct, Chuck, in that doctrinally, there's nothing about these two traditions that would argue with one another. There just isn't. At least not on the Zen side. I suppose at some point you could get fundamentalist enough with anything that you could say, no, you can't be a member of two clubs. But the co-belonging, the co-practicing of Buddhism in this country with other faiths is really, really commonplace. That happens a lot. So when you go to Amazon and enter in Zen for Christians, books and books and books and books, like lots of them, saying, yeah, you should be sitting every day. You can call it a centering prayer if you want. You can call it breath spirit if you want. But there's a lot to be seen about looking directly at your heart and sitting in silence and really getting intimate with the thing that's motivating you every day. And if I put that under my Christian roof, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense, right? I'm a child of love, I'm a child of creation, I'm a child of God. And to get closer to the human experience and to actually try to enact the instructions of compassion that I was given by Jesus of Nazareth, to try to meet individual moments of the human experience with kindness and love. This is starting to feel pretty darn Christian, or Jewish, or Muslim, or you start going, oh, I get it. There isn't a place in the Zen tradition where we all stand up and say, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of all that is seen and unseen. I've still got it in my bones, right? Those words. And they're powerful words, and they're beautiful words, and I love the moment where everybody stands together and goes, it meets that need you were talking about for belonging and inclusion. This is my tribe, these are my people. Wow. I can feel the positive side of that. I feel it in this room. Wow, the UUs, they come together. Look at them. They're the basement of Aslan, they're coming. They're just showing up and doing it. This is our thing. And we have rituals that we do, and we have songs, and we raise our voices together. That's beautiful. And we also see, because we are human, how easily that can become this. And go, oh. So as a Zen practitioner, I go, oh, good. That's where we start. What made me just want to do that? When did this become this? Because that was in my heart. I do not get to blame my parents for that. I don't know, I was influenced by all these things, but I don't get to blame the religion that I'm part of or the so no. That's me. That's my anger. That's my fear. That's my, what is that? Where does that come from in me?
Tribalism or whatever.
Yeah, and don't we all have it?
Yeah.
And so we all come by that honestly and go, oh, my relationship with that is actually really important. If I'm not aware that I'm acting from that place, I'm going to hurt people, aren't I? So this friend of mine, as part of his devotional practice, Zen meditation every day, sit in silence, cross your legs, face the wall. We sit and we face the wall when we meditate in Zen. Face the wall. What is this? So in his language, what is Christ asking me right now? Where's God in this? I can feel anger in my heart. What does God do to anger? What does Christ say about how to relate to anger? I can feel it. Oh, okay. How do we relate to that? Jesus told you how to do it. But Zen, that container that he allowed himself to go into, got him quiet enough, still enough. You can see it. Oh yeah, you can. There you go, buddy. Right? In my mind, I'm picturing the old metaphor of the cloudy water. We say this a lot in meditation circles. You probably go, oh, that glass of water is all cloudy. Well, then just set it down. Just let it sit there for a while, all by itself, nice and still. We know what happens. All the silt goes to the bottom, and isn't it nice? There's so much clarity there. And that's how practice showed up for him. Just a chance to be able to still some of the busy And all of us know what that is. Even if you're not a meditator, you know what I'm talking about. You know, you're thinking about the past, you're thinking about the future, and you're worried about the grandkids, and you're worried about the election coming up on Tuesday, and then the guy in front of you is going too slow, so then you got to downshift, and you say, oh, but I gotta get gas, and oh my God, that broccoli's gonna go bad, isn't it? Right? We gotta bring Indian food out to Buffalo. We gotta bring Indian food out to Buffalo. Oh God, it's gonna be cold by the time we get there. Do we have Tupperware? That one leaks. It's got stains from the last time we both hurry. Right? Does it sound familiar? Good, thank you. You do not have to be a Zen person to know, wow, it never stops. No, sweetie, no. Once you're born, it's too late. It just goes. It just goes. So how skillful it feels to me, actually how courageous, how loving it feels to me to say, I want to be in a relationship with that. What is that? I wonder what's underneath those waves. Like, what is going on down there? What is going on down there? So from that point of view, this beautiful man's Catholic faith, I don't think was ever. We've got one of my friends currently is a full priest, as I am, and Catholic. Yeah, she'd never miss mass. Mm-hmm. In no way thinks of them as being in opposition to one another, because there isn't any opposition really. But we have nicknames now. They've invented nicknames for themselves. Lubus, those are the Lutheran Buddhists. Cat Boos, those are the Catholic Buddhists. The Jew-boos, of course, that's easy. Jewish Buddhists, got a bunch of those. I forget the other ones. You get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of fun to say, isn't it? Two of our board members are right now go to the same Episcopalian church. Go to Episcopalians, and they're on the board of MZMC. One of them actually gives talks. He's a teacher. He's becoming a Zen teacher. What I hope you're not hearing, I have to be careful with my words, what I hope you're not hearing is that Zen doesn't have any kind of structure or center, and so that there aren't any parameters. There are, but I think the parameters are so around what is your experience of being alive and how do you relate to it, that for us, that doesn't feel like religion. But somehow in the Zen world, like, are you caring for the broom that you're holding while you're sweeping the floor? You know this is your life, right? It's going, going, gone. The thing you're doing right now has infinite value. There isn't a moment of your life that does not have infinite value. There will be a time in your life when you can't sweep a floor, and you give anything to be able to hold the broom again. And in that moment, you can see how clearly this thing is precious. Everything about it was precious. My neighbors were precious. Even the people that I fought with were precious. The cars were precious. The planet was precious. Oh my God, all of it was glowing from the inside. All of it was pregnant with holy. There was never anything that wasn't. And so cultivating the heart that goes, oh my God, all of it is a miracle all the time. How do I relate to it that way? I know that that's true. Every gospel I've ever read, every tradition I've ever read, it always says that same thing in some way or another. Always it tells me, there's no place to spit. As we say in Zen, there's no place to spit. You have to say it strict and humorlessly, there's no place to spit. Which, don't take it literally or you can't brush your teeth. It's not a literal thing. It's just a way of saying, please don't think that there's a person you can look down on, or a place that isn't precious, or an activity that doesn't matter, or a breath that you get to skip over. No, man, the whole thing is so, so, so important. So when I describe that feeling and that insight and practices that help me remember that, I think for some people that sounds like spirituality at its core. That sounds like real religion, I can hardly wait. And for others, it's like, yeah, but I don't get it. It's not attached to a story. There's not a belief system structure that exists in. And so questions like, how did the universe start? I'm like, I don't know. How would I possibly know that? I don't know. I'm so sorry to disappoint you, but why would I claim to know how the universe started? I do not know. I just don't know.
If you did, how would that change what you want to do and be in the life you're living?
And even if I did, thank you for that. Even if I did, even if I knew with absolute certainty how the whole thing started and how the whole thing's going to end, right now I have a broom in my hand. And so treating this moment with great tenderness, huge appreciation, devotion, love, right? If I know I'm going to die tomorrow, I want to treat this moment with love. If I know I'm going to live forever, I want to treat this moment with love. There's no difference. So that's why I think a lot of folks are like, oh, it's so practical. Yeah, speculation. I don't know how big the whole thing is. What happens after you die? Jeez, I don't know. I hope Indian food's involved. I'll give you that. But I don't know. Either way, I have a broom in my hand. And I think we all have a broom in our hand, don't we? Right? We have an election coming up. That's a broom. We have kids. We have families. We have mortgages. We have cars. We have shoes. Things to do. Broccoli? Yeah. Worry about it wilting in the trunk? Wow. There's a way of being with all that that I think is transformative. So there again, I'm still answering the question of, I can see why as a monk in a monastery in St. John's would be like, oh yeah, this is all fine. It's helping me remember that the kingdom of God is spread out upon the earth, but men do not see it. That's what Christ said. And that's part of how he remembered. I want to be one of the ones who sees it. Just remember him. Did you have something?
Right.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. So Unitarian Universalism has its roots in transcendentalism with Emerson and Thoreau.
Oh, yeah.
And a great relationship with nature. So I wonder what the relationship with Buddhists is with nature.
Identical. Yeah, the American Transcendentalist movement, which I only know a little about, so forgive my ignorance. That affirmation of nature is the first gospel. Kind of, that's probably not a Buddhist way of saying it. That's probably more of a
But we get it.
Celtic Christian way of saying it. But you get it, and it's the same thing of, yeah, this is the model. The blueprint for creation is already everywhere. Zen, because it's born in China, is heavily informed at its base with some Chinese understandings, worldview, Taoism especially. And it spends a lot of time in Japan before it comes here. And a lot of us know even the stereotypes of like the Zen temple or the Zen garden goes out of its way to have an aesthetic. I'm thinking of the raking of the sand, you know how they do in the Zen gardens. The important thing there is when it's done correctly, you can't tell where the garden that we tend starts and the wild begins. So I'm used to having like a garden has a parameter. This is where the garden is square. And this is the wild on that side of the road, and our garden is on this side of the road. And in that sensibility, the Zen sensibility is there shouldn't be a line because we're trying to make it look like that. But it's ours, and so we need to care for it in a certain way. But we already understand the system works. Like nature's really good at being nature. It seems like it always just hits the mark, right? Fish just nail day after day being fish. Like, wow, you have got that down. And apple trees just consistently produce apples. They just seem to nail it every time. Nature seems to really work. So the idea of being in harmony with is key. And I know that was part of the transcendentalist thing, as opposed to the
Dominion.
here is anointed by God, man holds dominion over his earth. Sorry, Grandma. There is another way of understanding that, if you are the steward because you are Homo sapiens. And so you better pay attention because you've got tremendous power. And when we actually step into that, then it's like, oh, now Spider-Man was right. We also have tremendous responsibility. We need to care for, not dominate. Very different psychology. So anyway, I know we're getting close here.
Yeah.